historian for the Marine Corps and now work as an archivist for the Air Force. This presentation was written mostly when I was working for the Marine Corps, so it does have a little bit of a Marine Corps bent to it, but it's not the sole focus of the presentation. And this is just an overview. A 45-minute presentation definitely can't get all the good details into it, but I'm just trying to give an overview of how they selected the unknown soldier, brought him home, and then the burial services in Arlington National Cemetery in 1921. One other thing, me and French, we're not really good friends. We hung out a little bit in high school, so I will apologize now for the improper pronunciation of any French cities that I get wrong. It's just, we're just not real good friends. So I'll get started with, so this is on Known But to God, the selection and burial of America's World War I unknown soldier. Oops, that went the wrong way, didn't it? Okay. So the idea of honoring the unknown war dead of World War I originated in Europe, but America embraced the idea, and a proposal to bury an unknown soldier was first introduced as early as October of 1919, so only about a year afterwards, but it was quickly dismissed. One of the reasons suggested for the dismissal was we had a relatively small number of unknown American dead, estimated to be under 1,300 men, and there was still hope that the Army's graves registration would be able to identify most of them, so they weren't quite ready to commit to the idea of doing a ceremony for an unknown soldier. There was also the issue that the U.S. did not have a suitable national monument in which to bury him, such as Westminster Abbey, where the British laid their unknown in 1920, and then, gee, many crickets, I'm just having a heck of a time. The French unknown was buried beneath the Arc de Triomphe in January of 1921, so they had national monuments in place. Whereas us, we didn't know where we could hold such a ceremony. But following the ceremonies in France and in Britain from 1920 and 1921, the press and the public support for such a burial here in the U.S. became pretty irresistible. Let's try this again. Here we go. Hamilton Fish III. You will also see him sometimes referred to as Hamilton Fish Jr. Can't quite understand. I think he went from the third to junior after his father died, but you will see both names associated with him. He was a congressman from New York, and he introduced a bill on 21 December 1920, and on 4 March 1921, the United States Congress approved Public Law 67, which authorized the selection of and the burial of the unknown American soldier in the Plaza to the new Memorial Amphitheater in Arlington National Cemetery in Arlington, Virginia. This is soon after it was built. If you've ever been there, it doesn't look this way today. As many of you know or have been there, that front area where the car is at, that roadway and that front area, they are now steps leading up to the monument that I call them the forbidden steps because no one's allowed to actually go up them anymore. So that has actually even changed, but it was brand new at the time, so the front of it was just a huge open grassy area for the most part, and a retaining wall versus the steps that we know of today. After much discussion and debate, it was decided that the unknown soldier would be brought home from France and laid to rest in his native land on 11 November 1921, the 3rd anniversary of the end of the war. In response to the choice of this day, Congress declared a day a legal holiday in honor of all who had participated in the Great War. Of course, this was the first time it had been celebrated as a holiday, but it wouldn't become a legal federal holiday known as Armistice Day until 1938. And then in 1954, the day is changed to what we know as Veterans Day, after the conclusion of World War II and Korea, because they were trying to honor the veterans from those wars as well. But originally, Armistice Day only becomes a legal holiday in 1938, but they did declare that one day in 1921 also a holiday for that year. The War Department ordered the Army's Quartermaster General, Major General Harry J. Rogers, to select the unknown soldiers from those buried in France on 9 September 1921. After an extensive search of the records of the unidentified dead, anything that might offer a clue to the person's identity, 4 graves were selected, 1 each from the 4 American cemeteries in France. You had the Meuse-Argonne, the Somme, Saint-Mihiel, and the Haine-Marne. The bodies were exhumed on 22 October and examined to confirm he had been a member of the American Expeditionary Forces, he had died of wounds received in combat, and that there were no clues to his identity whatsoever. Following their final preparations by a specially designated embalming team, the bodies were placed in 4 identical caskets and transport cases. After the selection and the preparation of the 4 candidates, the caskets were transported the next day by truck to the Hotel de Ville, or City Hall, in Chalon-sur-Marne. It was later changed to a they changed their name later in the 1990s, but originally that was Chalon-sur-Marne, and that's the City Hall that they utilized. Arriving at exactly 3 p.m. on the 23rd of October, the caskets were met by a large delegation of French and American officials. French troops carried the flag-draped casket. No, don't do that. Come back there. Carried the flag-draped caskets into the reception hall, and they placed them side by side on their transport cases. A French honor guard was established to stand vigil over the cases until they could be later joined by 6 American soldiers that they were bringing from the American forces that were currently occupying Germany. They were occupation forces, but they had been chosen to be pallbearers, so they were going to join them later that night. Alright, so they start out in the reception hall there, and they have the 4 laid out on their cases. Early on the morning of at 24 October, the caskets were once again rearranged by a different team. So again, they now rested on a totally different transport case, so you couldn't even identify what cemetery they had been pulled from. And this would also ensure that you still had no way of identifying or backtracking to help identify who the body might have been. Sergeant Edward F. Younger, U.S. Army, he was part of the pallbearers that were brought in. He was a combat wounded veteran of World War I. But he was appointed by Major Robert P. Harbaugh of the Quartermaster Corps to make the selection. Originally, Harbaugh was supposed to make the selection, but he decided at the last minute it was probably best that an enlisted soldier that had been wounded make the final selection. So he gave the honor up to Sergeant Younger. At 10 a.m., prominent French and American military officials gathered along with members of the press and French civil officials for a brief selection ceremony. After the rendering of honors to the dead by all the present and 2 short speeches by General Pierre G. Duport, he was the commander of the French 6th Army Corps, and General Rogers, Sergeant Younger proceeded from the rotunda to the reception room. And with him he carried a sprig of white roses that had been presented to him by a former member of the city council who had lost 2 sons during the war. The French band played a hymn from the courtyard while Sergeant Younger walked around the 4 caskets several times. choosing the third casket from the left, and I don't know if he was at the head or the back of the caskets. It's not terribly clear, so it would have been one of the two in the center section. He placed the roses, which would actually remain with the casket and eventually be buried with the unknown in Arlington Cemetery. But upon he picked his selection, he then faced the caskets and saluted. General Duport was next. He stepped forward, saluting and bowing, and then others in the attendance followed as they paid their respects as well. Following the ceremony, the American pallbearers carried the chosen casket across the hall into another room where a special casket that had been brought from the United States waited. After the body was transferred and arranged in the new casket, pillows were placed to hold it, and it was covered with an American flag. The casket was then sealed. The empty casket was then returned to the reception room where the three other unchosen unknowns remained, and they again changed the bodies from casket to casket, again so that no one could tell. So it was one more level of switching them around again. The remaining bodies that were unchosen were then packed onto a truck and taken to the Meuse-Argonne Cemetery, and they were immediately reburied as American unknowns. The casket containing America's unknown soldier was then once again draped in an American flag and carried in a procession from the main hall into the main hall, which is the center section right there. So they went across the hall where the four were to where he was switched into another casket, and then basically he was brought to lie in state into the center